I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mother Teresa of Calcutta said the fruit of prayer is a deepening of faith, and the fruit of faith is love, and the fruit of love is service. Dear God, I pray especially this evening that we deepen our faith through prayer so that the love we embrace would result in faith-filled service to all. I'm especially praying for our children, our youth, that we as a community will embrace their needs. So many are lost for various reasons, thus suffer at the hands of predators. Bless all adults with the strength, courage, and vision to reach out to these, some of our most vulnerable. I pray for the well-being and safety of all our first responders, for the city staff, directors, and administration, for the council, for our diligence in representing the voice of the citizens of Billings. Thank you, dear God, for the opportunity to bring your petitions to you in faith and for your greater glory. In the name of Jesus, your Son, amen.
Amen. Okay, thank you. Tony, please call the roll.
Councilmember Shaw? Here. Gulick?
Here.
Neese?
Here.
Owen?
Here.
Joy?
Present.
Chiriki?
I'm here, thank you.
Tidswell?
Here.
Purinton? Boyette?
Here.
Rupsis? Mayor Cole?
Here. We do not have any minutes for approval before us. Our next meeting will have September 26th minutes. We do have some council courtesies this evening. I'll just begin by noting that a number of the council members several were at the Montana League of Cities and Towns conference in Kalispell this week, and also our city administrator, assistant city administrator. So just want to give them an opportunity if they had any comments or observations. My main goal would be just to encourage all members of the city council to take a look at the governor's task force on housing report, 60 pages long. A copy was attached to the weekly that Chris sent out, and also on an email from Councilmember Owen. There was a lot of discussion in Kalispell about that. Some of those recommendations are things that the city of Billings is already well on its way to doing. Some things I'm sure we'd also embrace, and other things we probably wouldn't. So, council members Purinton, Chiriki, Chris or Kevin, anybody want to add any observations about their time in Kalispell? No obligation, but in case you'd like to.
I will just echo that there was quite a bit of focus on building housing in a number of the different things that I paid attention to and was, I don't want to say inspired by, but, at least it's good to see that there's a lot of attention statewide on that issue. The other thing that jumped out at me was the number of software companies there that had solutions that really start to tie together a lot of the different things that we do with computers and to connect our citizens up with them. So hopefully we'll be able to do something with one of those soon.
I was impressed with the information that I got through the TIF meeting. It was, I think I left after 3.5 hours. It was a 4-hour meeting, but anyway, it was good and met a lot of really good people that are working in their individual cities. So appreciated the opportunity to go, and thanks.
Great. Chris?
Mayor, the piece I would add, in addition to what's been said, we had a couple of different meetings with the city managers, city administrators, and the chief executives from the 2 city-county governments. Of course, the Housing Task Force was a very lively discussion around it, and as the mayor said, many things for some of us as cities that we've implemented, and so not necessarily for lack of a better term, kind of fearful of the outcomes because we've already implemented these things, but not at all comfortable with the idea that the state of Montana is going to would be dictating from Helena things like zoning, which over my career has been squarely at this table for decisions at the local level. So moving on from there, we also spent a fair amount of time talking about what inflation is doing relative to projects and payroll and being able to retain folks. And then the third subject is separate from the Housing Task Force, and I haven't figured out exactly where it's coming from, but it's a similar conversation about the state, something out of a case in Whitefish with impact fees or system development charges, that they may want to create a new bureaucracy in Helena to review all of our system development charges and or cities impact fees or connection fees. And again, that I can see nothing but headaches around the notion that in Helena that would be controlled at that level, as from experience, every community has in a different scenario relative to its capital assets and what its needs are going forward. So definitely worthwhile to get together. First live League of Cities and Towns Conference in 3 years. So, you know, a lot happens, and when you don't get together face to face, you don't quite make those connections. So it was well worth it. So thank you for the opportunity, and several of your staff, police chief, public works director, Kevin and I, city attorney, planning, were all there having meetings amongst their peers as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Kevin, and Gina was also in Kalispell. Okay.
I would echo what Chris said, and I also had some of my board meetings there that I attended during that. And unfortunately, even when you show up, you get elected to positions. So I'm now the current board chair for MMIA. So.
All right. I hope they increase the pay of that position. Yeah, sure they did. Gina, did you have anything you wanted to pass on to us? Okay, thank you very much. Any other council courtesies? So, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. On Saturday, I was lucky enough to be able to volunteer for the DBA. I was under Sky Point in the afternoon for the Harvest Festival. It went very, very well. There was a tribute to a child that had passed on a year ago, and so all the kids were able to blow bubbles, which was a lot of fun. And when they got bored doing that, they picked up all the little straw that was on the ground and threw it in the sky. So they had a great time, and I'm sure a lot of bathtubs were full of straw in the evening.
Thank you. Other council courtesies? Don't see any. We'll move ahead then. I forgot to bring the Red Ribbon Week proclamation, so we'll do that at our next meeting, which will be October 24th. That'll be the Monday after the beginning of Red Ribbon Week, which begins on October 23rd through the 31st. So just a reminder to keep your eyes open for Red Ribbon Week in recognition of the problem of human trafficking, and we'll look forward to that proclamation in 2 weeks. Council reports. Are there any from organizations that council members serve on behalf of the city? Councilmember Boyette?
I wasn't sure when to bring this up, but I was the one that worked on our city administrator's review, and I just received an email from Carla Stanton that 7 of the 11 have participated, so there's 4 that haven't. If you're not going to participate, please let Carla know so that she can wrap it up. If you are going to finish it, do it today or tomorrow at the latest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Joy and Councilmember Tricky.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, we had our monthly meeting for the CBD, the Community Development Board, and the majority of the discussion was over the ARP money that has come from HUD for the city, and really looking at what is necessary to meet HUD's requirements for finding a home for that money and that funding. So a needs assessment has been put together that will include a 92-question survey. Those surveys will go out to stakeholders, those who are dealing directly with housing, and once those surveys come back in, then that will really establish that a needs assessment that's necessary for the ARP funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Tricky?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Last week, the Downtown Housing Group had its, I don't want to say monthly meeting, but its occasional meeting. And at the meeting, the results of the downtown housing study that was done by, I assume, by the Downtown Business Association and Big Sky EDA were released. Very interesting information in it. Definitely shows towards a need of housing, and in my opinion, towards for younger citizens. If you want to, I will be distributing a copy to everybody on council. And if you out there in Billings land want a copy, ask me. Reach out to the Billings Downtown Partnership or Big Sky EDA.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other council reports? Don't see any. City Administrator reports. Chris?
Mayor and Council, the two things I'd add to the prior conversation: no ex parte communication came in, and over the next 2 weeks, we'd like to do an executive session before each of the next two meetings. So next Monday, if available, from 4:30 to 5:30, we did hear back from our mediator on the franchise case. So we need to have a conversation about that. And then that following week is when it's scheduled to go over my evaluation. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on then to public comment on non-public hearing items. Here tonight, that is everything that's on our agenda tonight. We have a fairly short agenda, famous last words, right? If I haven't cursed it, maybe we can get through before we even would normally take our 7:30 break with the regular agenda items. But for anybody who is interested in commenting on anything on our agenda tonight, there aren't any formal public hearings later. So items 1, the consent agenda; item 2, the tax increment financing assistance proposal; and 3, the appointment of city council committees; item number 3. This is your opportunity. So is there any public comment, either with us in person or online? If so, please come to the podium and just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address. No one's coming forward. Kevin, do we have anybody online? Okay. No. So, and no one has come forward. So we will close the public comment period on all agenda items and move on to item number 1, our consent agenda. Council, are there any separations for separate vote on consent agenda items? Councilmember Gulick.
Niece.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
It looks like him.
Yeah.
Item number M, please.
I don't want to say he's better looking or anything else, you know. H? N.
No, M as in Mary.
M as in Mary. Resolution authorizing issuance and settling the parameters for tax increment bonds. Any other separations? Any other separations? Don't see any, so we'll move ahead. Is there a motion relating to the non-separated items? Council Member Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we approve the consent agenda except for item 1M. Mary?
Is there a second? Council Member Gulick. Okay, any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Ripsis, Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to ask about the project to start the Skyline Trail, and I think Max said he had some slides that he had to show us this evening.
So, Councilmember Ripsis, yeah, very exciting. Obviously, on consent was 2 critical contracts relative to both the Inner Belt Loop and the Skyline Trail. So, Max got a couple of not photos, but renderings, so you and the public can just be reminded of a project that I think's got well over a decade worth of work behind both of them. So, and the good news is, so 3 decades, I'm hearing from some 4, 5. 3. So, yeah, Max, some questions have come up relative to understanding how will the Highway 3 interface work because there's some parking lots scheduled with the Skyline Trail. And so I'll turn it over to Mac, our city engineer.
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Ruxin, Council, just a few questions to answer. So I think the biggest takeaway is we have two parts of our build grant. Both of those parts are coming in. The bids came in under budget. Thank you. So that's the exciting news. It's the next step to actually moving dirt and creating improvements. A couple questions, and I just wanted to talk about the Skyline Trail overall. And I think the questions were like, what's happening to the current parking situation? So this exhibit just kind of shows that area south of the airport where we have our 4 parking lots. The one kind of in the middle with the dash line is the truck pull-through area. So we have 3 focused parking lots, total of 75 stalls, and then the one sort of truck parking pull-through area that accommodates large trucks. And so the question is, what's happening in between those parking lots with what I call the free-for-all? So I call it Skyline Trail, end of the free-for-all. So this just happens to zoom in on one of the parking lots, and just to give you a sense of what we're building there. So the photo on the left is our what I call the free-for-all that spans that entire area. So we have a typical parking lot there. We have a kind of a split rail wood fence that goes on the end of the parking lot. Discussions with MDT, we're also separating the borrow ditch area. I drew the red dots on the top, and those are delineators that go along the highway. So that's kind of visually separating this at night. When you're driving along, you'll see some delineators. That was a requirement of MDT. And then in the space in between the parking lots, we're actually taking the flat area and we're putting a borrow ditch in there, but we're actually excavating the existing gravel lots and seeding and topsoiling that. So try to get grass established. It's a little bit similar to the area that we have right now that's already complete. And then on the back side of certain areas, we have also a split rail fence. So that's kind of what that's going to look like. One other section, this is not everywhere. This is the pedestrian steel guardrail. We have several areas where we have some retaining walls. So this is kind of the safety fence, if you will, along the trail, what that's going to look like. So, and then those amenities were in the bids.
Thank you very much. Mac, would you run us through the numbers a little bit about how much money is available, how much the contracts were for, the excess, and what those dollars of in the excess category will need to go for?
Sure. So I'm going to round numbers. We're a little bit, the budget number is, and I'm adding the 2 projects together, is a little more than $18 million. And we had the trail, which was, came in a bid, 2.8 million. And then the inner belt loop is about 11.5 million. We also have to include it in that total number. We have some construction inspection, construction contract administration. We have a whole, remember we have 3 miles of trail and 5 miles of the street. So we have a whole bunch of materials testing, compaction testing, asphalt testing, those kinds of things within that budget. We're also carrying a fairly healthy contingency with federal highways. On the road project, we have a lot of rock excavation, so we have to carry some risk money along with, when we start dealing with the rock. We also have the several retaining walls on the Skyline Trail, so when we dig into the slope, we have some risks that we don't know what we're going to encounter with those slopes. So that said, we are going to have a little money left over, and we're talking with the feds on, are there some other things we can add to the project? I don't know what that list looks like or how much that's going to be within the scope of the agreement. But things like maybe benches along the trail. We put the pad for the Met transfer in the project already, so we may, now actually build the shelter that goes on the pad, things like that. So I don't have a comprehensive list, but we're gonna make some asks with that.
Great, thank you. Other questions for Matt? Councilmember Gulick?
First a comment, then a question. Well, both questions. Is wayfinding signage part of this contract as well?
Yeah, great question. So within the current bid, the good news is we have the interpretive signs. Those are the historic signs where it tells some of the stories. I believe there's 18 of those. And then we have the wayfinding signs that says, so many miles to the mayor's house, so many miles to Swords Park, et cetera, those kinds of things.
Fabulous.
Those are already included in the bid.
Second question.
Go ahead, Councilor.
So I understand, I was reading that they're still waiting for some final sign off by the federal government, but so is there, when can we start is the big question.
Yeah, so $64 question schedule. We have a 90-day period by where we kind of take actual construction bids and we kind of rewrite the grant. It's an amended grant agreement with the feds, and we're in that process right now. That'll probably push us through the first part of the year. So we're anticipating weather dependent starting in February or March. The follow-up question is probably, when are you going to be done? Contractually, we have to be done by June 15th, 2024. We're optimistic that hopefully we can get it built within calendar year 2023.
Thank you very much. That includes both the Inner Belt Loop and the Skyline Trail?
That's correct.
Okay. Other questions? Councilmember Purington.
Okay, it's not regarding this, though.
Yeah, on this.
Oh, okay.
Because we'll move on if there aren't any. Okay, thank you very much, Mac. Now, Councilmember Purington.
Thank you. So a question that I had regarding the snow removal on B1. So I think in the contract, it was for 1 inch of snow, and all this was the downtown parking area. And I was just a little surprised that it's 1 inch of snow, because that's really nothing in Billings, and it could be gone by noon. So, there are times that I ask about budgetary savings from time to time. I don't know if this would make that much of a difference, but I just thought 1 inch was a bit much, or a bit little.
I've got the contract up, but I'm looking to see what section that's in.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Purington, I'm not certain about the 1 inch requirement. These are for plowing city-owned parking lots, not the downtown parking area, like the street parking or the parking lots. I guess this will be for the library, Miller Building, and I believe one other skate park, perhaps. In the past, in the past, departments had kind of gone out and contracted with individual vendors, and we thought we'd try this year to see if we could get better rates by putting the entire city property together.
And I'm sorry, I didn't write down where it was, what page it's on.
Yeah,
But I
I'm
was just
scrolling
kind of
through and not
surprised.
seeing it, but yeah, my recollection, it was page 9, thank you.
And Andy, could you just clarify, this includes pedestrian areas? Obviously, a car doesn't have any problems getting through an inch of snow. But I imagine that's sort of a slip and slide issue if these are pedestrian areas, sidewalks, and all of that.
These are not city sidewalks. This is for the planning and community development parking at the Miller Building, the library. I believe the parking garages, we plow the top floor and haul that out of there.
Okay, but only the parking areas. People
Correct.
walk there, but
Correct.
cars as well. Okay, okay. Councilmember Purington, anything? No,
It just seems lost. So, I think that's it. Thank you.
So maybe staff could think about that a little bit. I don't know if there's a standard or whether the head of our MMIA coverage over there would get real nervous if we didn't do it at 1 inch, but those are the sorts of considerations, I guess.
Thank you, Mayor. I do see it here, and I'll talk with staff to understand. 'Cause my recollection is we typically were closer to 3, but let's see why we have the 1 inch threshold here. And if it's still indicates we contact them, so I'll ask that as well. Do they automatically go when an inch falls, or do we flag them and say, yes, please go out?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on the non-separated items? Councilmember Neese?
Chris, do you know with the landfill drop-off building, do you know when that is expected to be completed so people can start using it? It'll be used all the time now, like it was intended to?
Not beyond the update that Debbie gave us just a couple of weeks ago in the weekly. I want to say there was an update there. What's that? Oh, we've got people here.
You got it.
Got it? You're good. So when will it be ready to go? Sorry. Thank you.
Kyle, you want to come forward and chime in on that one? And if you'd introduce yourself for the audience.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Kyle Foreman, Solid Waste Superintendent. The east half of the building will be up and operational, I believe, the first week in November. Is that correct, Mac? Yes. As far as the total building, I believe it's going to be sometime first quarter of next year.
Okay, and is this contract that we're approving tonight for that's is part of that? Is that what's getting completed, or
The
are there more
amendment one
contract?
is for the east end of that building, so we can
Oh,
get
the
that
east
building
end.
back operational. Is that accurate?
This one is for the
Well, heck, you come up here and talk to me about it.
yeah, this amendment would cover that second scope of work, through next spring, which would be
Okay.
the west half of the
So this will be the last one we see, and it'll be usable after this, they're done with their work on this contract?
Yes, in the second. So 1st of November, we're going to be able to utilize the east half. That's already under contract. The west portion of the building is the scope of this amendment. And that scope of work would then be complete hopefully in the spring.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Councilmember Rowan?
Mayor, I have a question on item 1L. Is that all right to move on to that?
Sure.
I'm not sure if that's a question that Mac or Chris can answer, but I was just wanted to follow up on.
And just so they know, that's
The
sewer
sewer
easement
easements,
with
correct.
Belmont Properties, Mike Dimich Sons, PBN Properties.
So there was some emails back and forth about that this essentially means that there's been sewage going straight into the Yellowstone. So for these property owners who've been doing that, are there fines? I mean, does DEQ or someone address that? Is there a penalty for that?
Macker, I'm not aware of penalties from the past as we've run across this. I mean, first of all, no, it's not allowed. It's not desired. And when we come across it, the idea is to immediately remedy it. I'm not aware that DEQ does have some kind of a penalty for that.
That seems problematic.
Well, it is problematic relative to the fact that cities, everywhere I've worked, you run across this occasionally. Thankfully, it's very rare. This is the first one I can recall in the past 4 years here. But yeah, somebody has had a system that was not connected to our wastewater system and was running straight to whether it was a creek or whether it was Yellowstone, I'm not certain, but anytime we come across those, the idea, we immediately rectify them, get them connected to our system and get them in the billing system so that they're not polluting.
Okay.
Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to follow up on the same question, because my concerning is that these seem to be found they just happen to be found. It wasn't that we were looking for them or there was an issue they found some sewage in the river and traced it back up to that particular drain or whatever. Is there anything that the Public Works can do to make sure that our stormwater system is not being utilized for sewage dumpage?
I'm sure they could speak to all kinds of ways in which they're able to identify and how they have, keep this at an absolute minimum or eliminate it. But I couldn't tell you offhand, here's the 3 things that we do. I could work with Debbie and report back on, what mechanisms exist to minimize the fact that someone hooked something up in the 50s, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, and didn't connect it properly to the system. It is rare. I certainly don't want you to walk away or anybody watching to think, oh, this is some kind of common occurrence. I think it's extraordinarily rare to run across this, thankfully.
Councilmember Ripsis?
Chris, we should have a map of where all our sewer lines are, right? And shouldn't we be able to cross-reference that with where all our buildings are?
Yes, but not every building has just got one, connection. What's been split into apartments? What do those apartments still use one line? What do those have separate lines? I mean, but in the purest sense, to a degree, yes, we know who all of our customers are, where our lines all are. They get televised. I mean, the maintenance of our system is extraordinarily well. That's why we do well on defending ourselves against sewer backups. But to come across a property like this that wasn't properly connected, I'll have to ask them what mechanisms we use to catch these.
Councilor Ripsis.
And when we come across these, are they shut off immediately, or do we just, because this will probably be a matter of months before it's rectified?
I would assume it doesn't take us months that we do get on it, whether it's a contractor and work to rectify it, because yeah, you're talking about a piece of property that's polluting and they shouldn't be getting free. I guess they weren't getting a service, they were just dumping it into the river. But on both fronts, we're incentivized to get it resolved, not have the home unsuitable for living for any length of time, and get them connected to the system and on moving.
And Chris, I'll just sort of state the obvious. It kind of begs the question of whether we have an obligation to report to DEQ when we discover one of these situations, and if we do have that obligation, if we are. And I suppose even if we don't have an obligation, whether we do and should, and leave it to them on the enforcement side of it. But sure, I just am raising the question. I don't want to get our taxpayers in a lot of trouble, but that is a question maybe you could talk with Debbie and Boris about, and maybe even the city attorney. Anything else, Councilmember one? Okay. Okay, other questions on or discussion on the motion, which is for approval of the non-separated items? Nothing further? Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. This is a motion for approval of all the non-separated items, which is all the items except for item 1M. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Councilmember Nice, you had the separation item 1M. Would you like to start that one?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to table this until the November 14th meeting after we've had a chance to hear, because I think we were supposed to hear, well, actually, I'll make that motion first, and then I can give my reason why, if someone seconds that.
Okay, this is again the resolution authorizing the issuance and setting the parameters of tax increment bonds. Is there a second to the motion? Okay, Councilmember Owen makes the second. And go ahead, Councilmember Nice.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'd like to have it tabled because I think, tonight we were supposed to hear about I think it was not the Sportsplex, but the Sportsplex tonight as far as buying another building for sheet ice. That's not on the agenda. And I think there's, when we talk about the ability of building a Sportsplex down the road, we've also had issues with, as far as the funding, what the amount we can do with it, and really what it's going to cost. 2 years ago, I think the amount was estimated, and again, in a small side, $500,000 of taxpayer funds to support that, and we still don't know what size, how much, and that I think we need to really hear more about what we're getting ourselves into down the road by having to extend the TIF district further with these bonds, and I think it'd be a good idea to hear back on some of these projects before we move forward. We do have till December, end of December, so going to the November 14th would not prevent us from taking action on this before the end of the year.
Okay, Councilmember Owen, and then Councilmember Shaw.
So I agree, I think not table, but just delay until our sort of first business meeting in November. It does look like we're scheduled to hear about both the Sportsplex and the rec center update in that 30-day period. So I think that with the information of understanding where those projects are at and what's going on, what the cost parameters are looking like, the work that's being done, I think we'd be able to make a more educated decision. I would be hopeful and certainly happy to be corrected if it's true that if we approve it in November, that would still give the city adequate time to issue the bonds in December as they need to do. But I think that this might be premature if we still don't have the current updates on what's happening with the rec center or with the Sportsplex. And certainly, I mean, obviously, just because this gets issued, it doesn't force us to make a decision on either of those projects. But I just think council would have a more educated conversation about the extension of the district and the issuance of the bonds once we understood some updates on where those two projects are. So it would be my preference to just put this on the first agenda item in November after we've had a chance to consider and hear some updates on those other two projects.
Thank you. Councilmember Dees, just clarify, that was your motion, the first meeting in November 14th.
14th, that's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Shaw, you had your hand up?
Thank you. I get where this is coming from. I'm not going to support this motion. I think we're cutting our timeline very short. We're going to give ourselves only 6 weeks to make a decision. And I can tell you my decision about extending the life of the TIF is not going to change in the next several weeks. Whether we bond for the sportsplex, whether we bond for something else, it's an issue of $10 million to put toward the rec center or not, and we have only until December to make that happen. I mean, that's a significant amount of money. So for me, we can delay, but I'm still going to be voting yes, I think we should extend the life of the TIF. The question mark is, yes, I don't know about the sportsplex. I don't have an answer for that. But I do have an answer for whether I think we should extend the TIF life. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Boyette, and at some point we'll ask Andy to come up and give us some details.
That was my question. Is Andy, by moving this to November 14th, is this a big deal or not for you?
Mayor and council, we can issue bonds between November 15th would be the next day, or up until I believe December 9th, which would be the day before the 15th year. That is a tight timeline. The challenge with that is Thanksgiving's in there, and that is my concern. It does put a little bit of a tight timeline on that. I think it is possible to do it within that time frame.
And Andy, can you just repeat for us again what the drop dead deadline is then?
So the district was originally created on December 10th, 2007, and you have 15 years. So I'd say let's go to December 9th, 2022 to make sure we're well within that by 24 hours.
Okay, all right. Hey, Andy, while we've got you, remind us exactly what this resolution does. My recollection is it has a specific dollar amount in it. So are we then bound by that? Presumably we are. How big of a question is it, the sportsplex question, for example, or anything else that could change that dollar amount?
Sure. So the parameters resolution has really 3 parameters that you are setting. It's the maximum amount of borrowing, which is $3 million, the maximum interest rate, which is 7%, and then the term of the bonds, which is 25 years. So at this point in time, our intention is to issue the full $3 million. The reconstruction of the streets came in at more than $3 million, so this would reimburse for those costs. This would allow to have cash for future projects, whatever eligible future projects those may be. I know there's another phase 2 construction project planned in the CIP. So these funds would be available for any of that. The max interest rate's at 7%. If we were to issue, I think last week we were looking as estimates were about 5.75%, just with climbing interest rates. So we built in some cushion to make sure when we actually go to price these bonds in a few weeks, if it's approved tonight, we've made some cushion for potential changes that may occur. And then again, the term would be for 25 years. So council could amend this resolution to adjust any of those parameters. You could certainly delay it. I think, again, the delay would put a time crunch in there because of that December 9th deadline, and then what is really a week of Thanksgiving. There's not a lot of activity that will happen that week, so it will be a tight deadline there.
Okay, Chris.
Mayor, to your question, part of our staff analysis of this was not that it was relying on a decision relative to the sports complex. That's why we have it here. Whether you say no to ever building a rec center or purchasing what Sabura is talking about purchasing this was not reliant on knowing what was happening there. It was taking advantage of the opportunity to extend the life of the district and do the infrastructure projects if nothing else gets done. And definitely it puts us in a better financial position for any level of borrowing relative to investments going forward.
Andy, if you can comment on that specifically, wouldn't it be theoretically possible that we would say, let's borrow for all or a portion of the sportsplex purchase if we went in that direction, in which case it would impact this resolution?
I guess I want to clarify if we're talking about the sportsplex or the rec center. I think they are 2 separate projects, and I want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. So,
I was talking about the sportsplex because that's what I heard. Obviously, the rec center would be a much larger ask at some point in the future.
Okay, so we could potentially bond for the sportsplex. I think there's a lot of questions to be answered on that right now. Frankly, we don't own it. There's no buy-sell. I would be concerned there that if the intention was to bond for that project, that we will exceed that December 10th deadline. I think that to shift gears for a different project now, for something we don't currently own, nor have a contract to buy, I think we would probably run out of time.
I apologize for the confusion I must have added. My point was that the borrowing, this resolution, was not to fund either the rec center or the sportsplex concepts. It was to extend the life, help reimburse us for infrastructure projects, and set us up for future decisions about spending in the suburb going forward, which can be delayed or made tonight.
Yeah, and I think we understood that it was just this theoretical possibility of adding in the sportsplex, I guess would be my interpretation. We'll go to Councilmember Owen and Neese.
I just have a question, Chris, as to what you're saying here. I mean, you say that they're not linked, but the staff memo does link them. I mean, quite explicitly, the staff memo makes it clear that if these aren't issued, it could harm the rec center project. So I mean, it doesn't seem consistent what you're saying now with what's in the staff memo.
And I think what he'll say is it goes to the length of
Correct.
yeah, not the dollar amount.
But certainly there's a nexus.
Yes, there's a nexus there in the capacity we'd have for future borrowing. I simply didn't say very clearly that we didn't view this, bringing this to you tonight was somehow going to be negatively or positively impacted on a decision weeks or months from now on this sportsplex. I mean, from a staff perspective, this is not something, it's not in your capital improvement plan. It's not something we've put any background into getting, but extending the life so that the rec center or other infrastructure projects by the suburb would have greater opportunity to be funded. Maximizing the utilization of the TIF district was our primary motivation in bringing this to you. And you are correct, it does provide, if we extend the life, we absolutely provide ourselves with more options relative to decisions on rec center or any other expenditure in any borrowing for the suburb.
Okay, Councilmember Neese, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Mayor. Andy, if I understand correctly, the TIF district has enough money to pay for this now without having to bond. Do I understand that correctly?
The TIF district does have enough cash to pay for the street reconstruction project that is completed nearly. That project is, so I'm told, 99% done, and I think we've paid 80% of the bills. We're just waiting for the rest of them to trickle in. So the cash is there. The sole purpose of issuing these bonds is to extend the life of the district, to maintain those financing options for future projects. The other item I'd like to add, I think, Mayor, you had asked kind of what approval of this resolution means, just so you are all clear. If this is approved tonight or anytime in the future, you are authorizing me to go and issue bonds binding the city for this debt. So this is the opportunity to make that decision. You will see a resolution come back to, finalize, hey, here's what the bonds turned out to be. At that point, we've entered into a contract to issue debt. You can't go back then. So this is your opportunity. I want to be explicitly clear tonight.
Okay, Councilmember Rupsis.
Yeah, so the decision to extend the life of the TIF was made in November 21 when council approved the authorization or approved the project for the unimproved streets to be reimbursed by bonds. And we haven't heard any arguments that we shouldn't be extending the life of the TIF tonight. So I'm going to offer a substitute motion to approve item 1M.
Okay, Councilmember Rupsis, Councilmember Shaw. Substitute motion not to, just to approve it tonight, not to delay it to November 14th meeting. Further discussion now on the substitute motion. Councilmember Joy, we haven't heard from you, and Councilmember Neese.
Thank you. I will support the motion to approve tonight the extension of the TIF. This is not a As Councilmember Reps has said, we had already made that decision that we would bond. So that decision has already been made. This also was something that we've dealt with the downtown TIF and the two-way conversions. We previously went through a process of bonding, and that extended the life of the downtown TIF. This is, I would say, not an unusual thing. It isn't, and it isn't dependent on any of the other issues that are in the description in the memo, but they are all, of course, dependent on that. So I will vote for the extension of the life of the TIF and the bonding for the $3 million for the streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Neese.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tariki, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council. I totally agree with Councilmember Repsis that this has been discussed, and we did decide to extend the period of the TIF district. It is very obvious that the Sportsplex is not shovel-ready and won't be within the next month. It's very obvious. It's even more obvious that the rec center will not be. So any conversation that we might have in a month from now based on whether or not to do this is still going to be set on the same set of information that we're staring at tonight. If, as Councilmember Rippes has pointed out, you don't think we should be extending the life of the TIF district, then you need to be making an argument about that. In my mind, if we fail to do that, we are cutting $10 million off of the budget for what the rec center might look like, simply by not voting to extend, by not voting to put this bond issue in play before December 15th. And I don't think that that is fiscally very prudent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilor Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. So Andy, do we have to do $3 million? Could you do $1 million, which would not, if you're going to end up doing a rec center, wouldn't you want to maximize how much money you could borrow, 2 years from now? So could you make this a lesser amount?
You certainly could do a lesser amount. Again, those were the three parameters: the maximum amount, interest rate, and the term. $3 million, it was sized large enough to make it interesting for large lenders. $1 million's pretty small, and then the legal fees and everything on it are fixed, not a percentage of the total. So we sized it high enough to cover the cost of the project. At least is what we thought. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the now substitute motion before we proceed to a vote? Okay, so again, the substitute motion is to just approve item 1M. If the motion is clear, if in favor of item 1M, please raise your hand. Voting in favor, council members Shaw, Gielich, Joy, Chariki, Boyette, Ripsis, and Cole. If voting in opposition, please raise your hand. Voting in opposition, council members Neese, Owen, Tidswell, and Purington. Motion passes 7-3. And that concludes then item 1. And our
Mayor Cole, 7-4.
I'm sorry.
I think it was 7-4.
7-4. Yes. Thank you. Okay. And then we'll move on to our regular agenda, item 2. Tony, would you read item number 2?
Item number 2, tax increment financing assistance from Downtown Urban Renewal District to MJ Shanks LLC for improvements at 122 and 124 North 22nd Street. Downtown Billings Partnership Board recommends approval.
So Mayor and Council, as they're getting set up, if I could respond, Debbie has given me some information, even though she's out sick, so she should go to sleep.
Chris, please do.
We don't get fined by DEQ. We discover these through televised. We run video cameras down both sewer and storm water. So in this case, running down a stormwater pipe, we see something that doesn't belong in the stormwater pipe, and now we've discovered a problem. Extraordinarily rare. Debbie says I'm not overstating that, but when it happens, we immediately get on to get the fix. So.
Thank you very much. Mehmet.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Matt Casey with the Downtown Billings Partnership. Thank you so much for your time today on the tax increment financing project. This is a picture that of the property that you'll see from the corner of 2nd Avenue North and North 22nd Street. We'll talk a little bit more about the details of the properties in the next slide here from an aerial view. So this right here is what we were looking at from the previous image. This is what is currently deemed as like what you'd consider inhabitable right now. There is the corner unit with two bedroom units, one at the ground level and one upstairs, each with its own separate entrance. And then behind it, there are 6 one-bedroom units right along that street on 2nd Avenue. The second half here of the property is what is deemed uninhabitable right now in its current conditions. There is the duplex at the front here with 2 units, and then there's under this large tree, which is not visible from the aerial view, there's what will be a studio unit, and then there's a side-to-side duplex. And then down here, you'll see the details of the units with each one, how many units are in there. So a total of 13. Also, just to understand a little bit the boundary of this, this right here, North 22nd Street, is where our district ends, basically at the center line. And then the eBird starts on the other half of the street. So this is where like the 2 districts meet. Geographically, down here at this corner is the Thirsty Street at the garage. Up here, across the street from the property, is the Hog Wild Cafe. And then a block west and a block and a half south is where you saw the Old Town Flats Griffin project back in February. So just kind of understanding the neighborhood and what's around here. And so we're going to look at some pictures of current conditions of the properties, all of these buildings. Exterior conditions for this is still the corner right here, which we've deemed the inhabitable one. This is primarily going to receive some exterior attention. There are missing gutters, there's some attention to the roofs, the siding, the windows, some new paint jobs, some repair to the landscaping that was damaged as a result of recent fire at the property. In fact, if I go back to the original picture here, this is more of a realistic condition of what the tree looks like now. Also, it's been charred by the fire, so that's going to need to receive some attention. But that's the main concern with these properties on the corner, is mostly exterior work. But as we travel down the street here on 22nd and kind of take a peek at this yellow duplex, and if we continue to travel along the driveway, these units are going to be receiving both exterior work and then some interior work that evolves around utility work. There's some utility work that's missing. There's some incompatible connectivity, upgrading up to code, things like that. But this is the continuation of that 2 duplexes, the yellow building. And then if you continue down there is where what's going to be a studio unit and then the side-by-side duplexes. You'll see it in the next pictures, I believe. There it is. So this is a single unit, and then this is going to be 2 duplexes. And then back there is where the alley, here's an image from the alley. We can see it further in the next slide, maybe. There we go. That's also from the back, looking at it from the alley. This path right here, and I'll go back to the original picture just to show you a little bit more too. This is right here, in between the 2 properties. This is not an alley. It's simply just a little space in between the 2 properties, but it had unintentionally become a pathway for some of the transient population to travel through, and therefore, when the new owners acquired it, there was plenty of cleanup to do down here. Things that have been abandoned and left and there just from previous loitering and hangouts. So likely what they're going to be looking at, and they're receiving a SEPTED evaluation, likely they're going to fence that just so that it all indicates it's one property. The alley is obviously open access, and then the front of the street is the same. The interior mostly is going to be just updated and refurbished, a little bit modernized, cleaned up, but obviously making sure there are no, random openings to roofs and random openings to crawl spaces. That's obviously improving the safety of these units and making sure that they're utilized to the best of their capacity. You'll see that there's a lot of leakage that's happened in some of these properties that, deferred maintenance issues, especially with lack of gutters and not paying as much attention to the roof. So they're going to have to address these as well as some of the utilities. This is a restroom that will be a part of that single studio unit. Currently, it's in the next picture, I believe. That would be the living quarters, and then that would be the kitchenette. But that's the current conditions they're in, and so it'll need attention. And so the idea is to activate these 13 units in a much cleaner and safer manner, and hopefully have them live and ready by next spring. And the prices are going to range in that $650 to $950 price tag based on the smallest units to the bigger units. As I mentioned earlier, half of them are not deemed inhabitable right now. These are some of the records that we've pulled up to in terms of previous calls at this property, in terms of code enforcement violations, some light police calls, and some EMS and fire calls as well on this block, on this corner. Here's a breakdown of the expenses. As you see, the focus is on some safety enhancements, some structural foundational repairs that will stay with the structure and the asset, and then some utility upgrades to the building, making sure that it's up to code and safe and healthy for everyone. In terms of the project by the numbers, currently assessed at this a little over $500,000, and keeping in mind it's two properties, it's 122 and 124. So this is their combined assessment as it stands right now. And then this is, as we've practiced among all three TIF districts, is what is anticipated after the acquisition and the new improvements at 80%. I have more details about this too, just per the last conversation we had in September, if you have questions about that. And so it brings us to an annual tax increment of about $12,000, which then puts us at almost 10 years. With the project merits, obviously addressing housing needs and safety elements, especially with this property, this has a very visible element of blight, both in the physical aspect of it, but also some hazardous living conditions. It conforms with the guiding documents. It encourages, hopefully, other activity in the neighborhood, as we've heard about the Griffin project not too far from here, and now this. Word gets out, and also, working with the eBird right across the street with their activity, hopefully that will generate some interest and some more added conversations to these properties. There is a lot of housing presence between about 20th and 25th. So, and these properties offer a nice sort of added diversity of units where it's not a mixed use type of housing, unlike what we've been bringing to council. This is strictly just housing in the standard traditional sense. So DBP recommends approval, the award not to exceed $110,200. In theory, if this project is as scheduled to be completed in this fiscal year, they'd be eligible for the reimbursement in the next fiscal year. And then the developer must sign a development agreement as standard for our applicants. And with that, I'll open it up to questions, comments. I do have one of the applicants here. It's a younger couple in town who both have full-time jobs, and this is a side gig that they do. So, but if they have personal, specific questions for them.
And it'd be great to hear from the applicant. If you want to come forward, please do and introduce yourself.
Mayor, Council, thank you for having me. I'm Jamie Shanks. I work at Hub Insurance, and my husband is a plumber. We've been in Billings for about 10 years now, so we do own about 29 units including these 13. So this was a recent purchase for us, and we are excited to be downtown and hopefully turn it around. So any questions for me specifically?
Does your husband have plenty of time on his hands? Because it looks like.
If only we could find employees.
Yeah. Questions, Councilmember Tidswell?
What is the targeted end date for this?
Hopefully by the spring.
So April 2023, is that part of it?
Correct, yes. So, yeah.
I appreciate it.
Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This question is for Mr. Casey. On the return on investment of this property, you have used a commercial tax rate. Is residential in the downtown area taxed at the commercial rate? Thank you.
Good question, yes. So as far as I know, and I can double check on that, because it's in the central business district, it'll count as that. However, in relation to that slide that we talked about last in September with the old Billings hardware building, the board and I discussed kind of presenting two rows here where we can say one of them is the positive outlook of 80%, and then the other one is maybe the negative outlook of let's go down as low as 50%, and what does that look like? So just for your curiosity, if we were to do that, the almost 10 years would become almost 15 years, which is still within the sunset date, way under it, and still welcomed by the board. However, our real estate expertise on the board pointed out to us that when you go and look at this property on cadastral, it shows you actually, the Department of Revenue's way of assessing that property, and the Department of Revenue assesses properties in two ways: cost of the project or income of the project. In this case, they'll look at the income approach. And in our real estate expert's opinion, at that point, he thinks that even the 80% is too low if they are to take the income approach. So that's why we settled on the 80% as a compromise between the two approaches. Yep.
Okay, Councilmember Trachey, Councilmember Shaw?
Either one of you. I think I heard you refer to it, but I did catch the number. How many of the units are occupied, unoccupied?
Sure.
So basically on 124, the up-down duplex, and then 3 of the 6-plex units are currently rented, and then yellow duplex, studio, side-by-side duplex are uninhabitable. Those are the pictures with the hole in the floor, the roof's leaking, all that kind of stuff.
So, oops. So I am assuming that you've got plans in place to make sure that nobody's permanently displaced or anything like that during the renovations?
Correct, yes. So you mean of the current tenants that are living there? Correct, yeah. So basically the up-down duplex, it was a part of a fire. The previous owners have refinished the inside, so it's only exterior work that needs to be done just to improve the looks of that corner property. They never painted it, put gutters on, fascia, landscaping is bad, that kind of thing. So that should not displace them. It might be a minor inconvenience during some work, but they'll be able to stay in their units. And then basically on the 6-plex, they are habitable. There's some things that need to be fixed, but they're habitable. So we're just doing the interior portion of those as people move out, if and when they move out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I recognize Councilmember Shaw and the Councilmember Nice.
Thank you. I move to approve the tax increment financing assistance from Downtown Urban Renewal District to MJ Shanks LLC as recommended by the DBP board.
Thank you, Councilmember Nice. You had the second?
No, I would had a question.
Okay,
for the
we'll get the
applicant.
second, Councilmember Gulick, and then
I'd like to speak to the
Councilmember Shaw, you
motion.
can speak to your motion, and then eventually we'll get to Councilmember Nice.
I'll be quick, but I wanted to say, Mehmet, I asked you to bring us back more housing. You did. I'm so happy. 13 more units downtown. This is excellent. We're going to edge up over this 100, I think, in this year, which is really exciting to me. So I love that this encompasses a huge percentage of this block, if not this whole block. That's a lot of blight that I really appreciate that we have people that are willing to take this on, and I would be proud of the city to be a partner in this. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gulick. Did you want to speak to your second, or then Councilmember Nice? Councilmember Nice.
Thank you. Got a couple of questions for the applicant. You mentioned there's tenants there now, and they won't be displaced, which is good to hear. As far as the rent, though, I think Mehmet said 650 to 900 or something like that. So is there rent going to be going up for these new tenants once you do the remodels?
Those are the expected rents once they're remodeled.
Okay.
So,
What are the current rents?
the current rents in the sixplex, the 3 units in the middle are currently inhabited, and those are at $700 a month. And then the up-down duplex, those are the only 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and those are actually at $1,050.
Okay.
So, but because those are all kind of 1-bedroom and smaller units, that's where we would be at $950 for those ones once they're renovated.
Okay, and then you mentioned there was a fire. So what happened to the insurance money for the fire? I mean, did they not?
Went to the previous owners and they did the interior portion of the duplex, but they never got to the exterior portion by the time we purchased.
Okay, so they got paid for the insurance and that, and then they sold the building to you at a discount because it got insurance money, or they just didn't finish it, and now the city is funding the finishing of it?
I guess that's a good question. At the time when we purchased it, it was market value of the current condition that it was in. So I wouldn't know how they were paid and how much they were paid, unfortunately.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councilor Rowan?
Mehmet, could you go back to the slide that is the project scope?
Oh, yeah. There we go.
So when you talk here about 49 EMS calls, what time period is that in?
Ooh, good question. Wife, do you remember? Past 15 years.
And is the same true for the police calls?
That was maybe 10 or all same, even
So,
code, yeah.
I think it's great to highlight the crime prevention impact, particularly of downtown housing. So when you're able, if you could just bring us, like in the last year, here's how many police calls to the site, fire calls. I mean, my vote won't obviously turn on that. If you have it for the last year on police calls, the total number, I'd love to see it, just out of curiosity. But I think it would help council understand the impact, the crime prevention impact of some of these downtown projects.
Okay.
So if you're able to get the data, not a big deal, but if you're able, I'd sure love to see it.
Yeah?
Thanks.
We can do that.
Thank you.
It's 10 years, yeah.
But before we come back, Councilmember Neese, was any other comments on the motion? No, Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I like the idea there's housing downtown. I like the idea we're getting rid of blight. I think this is really a good project in a lot of ways. I'm not sure I like the approval amount, because when I look at this, a lot of these units, it's a typical bad tenant situation where a landlord has to pay a lot of money to repair their housing unit after a bad tenant kind of destroyed it. It's unfortunate that the prior landlord didn't take care of the property, and this highlights a lot of the rentals in the city, in the downtown area, where we need to maybe go through some other ways. We've got I think there's mentioned the Colonial with some of the same issues. There's more property like this that we can't just go out and tiff our way out of fixing it. We have to find a better resolution to do this. So I like this project, but I'm not going to support it, because I think that when you look at the investment, yes, 1.1 million overall, but the project cost is $184,000, and we're funding 110 of it. 59, over 60% of the project is we're paying for renovating housing that the prior tenant didn't renovate before he sold it. So I don't like that portion of it, and that's why I'm not going to support it. But I do think we as a city need to do a better job of policing this type of property beforehand, so that it doesn't get in this condition in the exterior or interior when it's uninhabitable. But thank you for bringing that. I do appreciate it. Again, it's housing. I like it, but I think the cost-wise, I don't think we should fund renovations that should have been done by a prior owner.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion? I will vote in favor of the motion, but I have a lot of sympathy for Councilmember Neese's comments. This is just a really high percentage of TIF to new improvement money by the developer. And that's why I think we need to come back and change our TIF policy to address the inclusion of acquisition cost and separate that out, so that we're really looking mostly at new money for improvements. I would be in favor of reducing that 5-to-1 ratio down to a 4-to-1 in exchange. And that's not to say that sometimes acquisition isn't very, very valuable. Just putting these things in new hands, that's what's causing this development to actually happen, is there's a new owner. So it's a huge value. It's a small, relatively small dollar amount, but a really big impact. It's housing, and realistically, I have a feeling that these costs are not going to come in under what they estimate, but be well above, and that's going to be on the developer. So I'm comfortable with this, but it's not something, it is something I'm concerned about long-term, is that we make sure we get a higher percentage of skin in the game by the developer for just improvements. Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, and I agree with both of what you just said. The question that I have, Mehmet, on the improvements that have obviously already started on the list of things that are to be done, those are definitely things that have not been started prior to the application.
Correct. What we will reimburse is things that have not started, and also we do not, per standard of all TIF districts, we do not reimburse acquisition, but it is included in the investment equation of the private sector.
Okay, any further discussion before we go to a vote? Okay, so we'll move to a vote. The motion is for approval of item 2 in the recommended amount. If in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Voting in favor are the 10. Voting in opposition, Councilmember Neese. Motion passes. That concludes item number 2 and brings us to item number 3. Tony, would you read item number 3?
Item number 3, appoint members to council committees.
Okay, and Tony, do the council, does everybody get a copy of the proposed recommended council appointments? Yes. Okay, and just to remind everybody, the recommendations after input from council members were Budget and Finance Committee, council members Gulick, Owen, and Boyette. For the Legislative Committee, council members Shaw, Neese, Tricky, Purington, and Rupsis. For Local Affairs Committee, council members Joy and Tidswell. For Council Operations, myself, Deputy Mayor Boyette, and Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Neese. Those are the proposed recommendations. So we don't have or maybe we do have, it looks like we do have a presentation on our agenda by council member, or by City Attorney Dahl. Gina, it's on the agenda, therefore.
You cut that down to 10 slides? Or
I constantly say no presentation when I'm filling out the staff memos, and they still put me on there as a presentation. No, I don't have a presentation. This was just a bookmark for you all to get your council or your committees appointed, committee members appointed.
Okay, so at this time, council, what would be in order is if there are any questions or if there is a motion relating to item number 3. Councilmember Shaw and Councilmember Joy.
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the list that you just read, Mayor. I think that sounds great.
Okay, and Councilmember Owen makes the second. Any discussion on the motion before we proceed to vote? Councilmember Purington. And then, I'm sorry, Councilmember Shaw. So Purington, Shaw.
Okay, thank you.
Or Joy, I'm sorry.
We're going to put name tags up here, not over there.
I wish I could say it's late, but it's not.
There's no excuse. Okay, I'm just going to come up with the question because it came up in a conversation that I had with Chris today. And so moving forward, how these committees work, and I am totally for it. But right now there was a discussion. We have not had a discussion on CPACE. And I think all of you got my email, so I won't go through the dynamics of that email. But it's gotten down to the point now where I've heard back from 2 commissioners that are willing to come to a work session. And I thought, perfect, this is great. Because how long have we been wanting to have one of these sit-downs with them? And so they're willing to come, and I even kind of threw it out there. Maybe we could talk about the jail and some other issues, whatever, some of the other council members come up with. So, Chris made the comment, he says, well, why do we have these subcommittees? And I'm just going, well, that doesn't mean that I can't have input into, doing some of these things. And, and I don't want to overstep where, the boundaries of these committees. So I guess what I'm asking is, how far does it go whenever a council member may have a suggestion or some sort of a path into, whether it's budget or legislative issues or local issues? What are those dynamics that you guys are expecting of council members with your committee? I mean, if someone came to me and said, or they've talked to another legislator and they came to me and they said, I've been talking to so-and-so and this is what we think, great. So anyway, I'll just let it go at that.
Okay, we'll ask Councilmember Shaw and Owen to comment on kind of this question of, I don't want to call it technical jurisdiction, but what's the proper procedure here?
Hard and fast.
Yeah.
Strict jurisdictions. No, I was kind of thinking as you were talking, Councilmember Purinton, that my thought has been all along that really we could kind of default of throwing things to a committee, but if a majority of council wants to have that discussion at council, we should absolutely do that. So I think I think that's a good example of, we could say, okay, let's have the local affairs committee look at it, but if there's 6 council members that are like, nah, we want to have that conversation here, then I think that's an easy answer to whether it's in the committee's jurisdiction or not.
Okay, so kind of the majority of the council's views. I'd recognize Councilmember Owen and Councilmember Denise.
Yeah, I think I fully concur with that input. I think council has the right, under the concepts that we've come up with, to refer something to committee. 6 people vote and say, let the committee work on it for a while, then they do. But if the council says, you know what, we're going to keep this here and the committee doesn't need to work on it, or the committee needs to work in this scope and not this scope, all of those things I think are options that we retain here. And I think one of the things the local affairs committee is going to have to work out is what happens to our other tool that we have now, which is our quarterly meetings. Do they go away? Do they become once a year, twice a year type things where we would also do this? I think that's something that committee is going to have to figure out. So the particular example of CPACE, I think we would have said, well, put it on the October 27th agenda and let's talk about it there. Now, hopefully, we'll have a committee that this could be referred to, but I think Kendra's correct. Ultimately, the council has the prerogative of whether to refer something to committee or decide, what, we are going to have a joint session with the county commissioners. So I don't think we lose anything. I think this just creates an option for us. And I would just add as a side note that per council's request, I have, and I've sent it to Kendra and Gina for review, drafted at least a template set of rules, and those sort of things can be elucidated more there in those rules. I think we've gotten some good feedback from the clerk on notice and minutes and all those sorts of things. So we will have that template for committees to consider, hopefully, Gina, within a week. And then they can adopt their rules and put more parameters around that if council desires. So.
Okay, thank you. I'd recognize, I think, Councilmember Denise and Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and I fully see that these committees, sometimes maybe it will be kicked to the committee to review that, but the committee could also come back to council and say, or to Chris, say, we want to put this on a work session, and then really present to the council, and the council can look at it and say, yeah, that looks really good, let's put it on the agenda, or no, that looks good, but we want some changes, to go kick it back to the committee to bring it back another time. So I think utilizing the committee, really it'll be up to the council directing the committees what to do. They do it and then bring it back, and then we kind of decide where to go from there. So I think this is really going to help move some of the agenda items forward in more informative, that we're going to actually be able to look into things a little bit closer and understand what's going on a little better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And I would just like to say, congratulations, Councilmember Tiswell. We're together. And I just would like to say this. I'm pretty small, but I overachieve all the time. So look for the local committee, governance committee, to be doing a lot of great work, because this is like the most important thing that this council will do is have an input into what happens at the local level. I agree that, and I think that part of what we imagine our hope for these committees to be able to do is to take on input from other council members as they have ideas or have a sense of things that haven't been addressed, that need to be addressed. And I also think maybe part of what committees will be doing is prioritizing some of these things. Is this something that we need to spend a lot of time on, how best to approach moving an issue that's brought to a committee forward? And so I wouldn't imagine that any council member wouldn't have input into the committee's work or vice versa. So that's how I sort of imagine that. I think that's the way collaboration works best, and I wouldn't be strictly jurisdictional on this, but no, I think it also helps to have those sideboards so you don't go too far and overwhelm yourself with work that isn't a priority. So, yeah, I look forward to the opportunity. I think Councilmember Tidswell and I will have a quite important discussion about how those quarterly meetings may take on, what they may look like. If they haven't been very effective in the past, let's not keep on doing what doesn't work. Let's figure out what works better. So I have a lot of vision for our committee, and congratulations, we're going to have a great time. Thank you.
Is the local affairs committee going to have like uniforms and a fight song?
We will have just hats and jerseys. That's what we'll have.
Is there a budget for this? Councilmember Triki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Two fairly brief comments. Well, one comment, one question. So you may have noticed that I voted against this. And the reason I voted against it was I felt like it was more structured than certainly I was asking for. Really, all I wanted us to do is that individuals within a group that we commit to reaching out, finding groups that we were going to work with, and report back to council, which is one level of stuff. And in fact, I think, the thing that I was worried most about is all the other little groups and things that are going on out there that we're really not paying attention to. But, be that as it may, I think, certainly it's something that needs to be done. One of the things that, Ms. Dahl, one of the things that I had asked and I haven't followed up on is for us to start thinking about how we can use Teams for something like this. If the asynchronous communications aspect of these things where you can make a comment and have it build on it and stuff like that over time, I think would be really useful for us. So I assume we haven't thought about it.
And by Teams, I assume you mean the capital T computer program Teams as opposed to little t.
Yes, that's correct.
Mayor, Councilmember Triki, are you suggesting that the Teams, Microsoft Teams, be used for meetings or simply just to have discussion between committee members?
Exactly.
For the actual meetings?
Asynchronous communications aspect of it is like, messaging and stuff like that. You put something up there and then somebody comes in 6 hours later, reads it, responds to it, and the information flow accumulates over time as opposed to having to have a specific time and place, even if it's virtual, for everybody to be in this same place to talk.
Well, I think the way that they're currently designed, these committees and the resolution, as well as the proposed rules that are being put together by Councilmember Owen and Shaw, are that these are meetings to occur in person, so that, because obviously they're subject to all the open meetings requirements. So you've got to ensure that the public has the ability to participate and comment and observe and all that stuff. So I think if Teams were going to be used, we would need to really dig into how that would work. So I guess long way of saying no, I haven't really dug into that because that was not my understanding of how the majority of council wanted to proceed. But if it is, then we can certainly look at if and how we could make that work.
Well, I will poll council and see if we, as a group, really want to move forward with that type of communication. Thank you.
Okay, further discussion on the motion, which is for approval. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I would suggest we look into what Danny's saying. I use Teams at work, and it's very collaborative, and you can post things where public can see it or open groups can see it, and they can't modify it. And there are stability, so maybe Dave Waters needs to get involved in this, but it really does help, and I think it would give some continuity. And as members of the teams, we could also check on what other of the committees are doing, and then post some of our comments if we're asking for something to be done and suggesting. So it could be a really valuable tool to open up that. And I believe, and I don't recall if they record as well meetings, and if that's the case, then we could be utilizing those to record meetings as part of the minutes and things like that. So thank you.
Okay, that might solve the minutes problem. Chris?
My comment doesn't pertain to your vote, so if you give me the opportunity after the vote, I do have a suggestion how we can get some things started right away, kind of in these areas, so.
Okay, and you want us to vote on that first?
I would suggest, I don't want to muddle up what you're thinking there.
Any further discussion before we do proceed to a vote? Okay, the motion is for approval, item number 3. Including well, we've already approved the structure of the committee, so I guess this is really the member allocation or appointment. If in favor of those appointments, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. That motion passes unanimously. Chris?
So specific to, I guess I can't say it was a conversation, it was a text conversation between Councilmember Purinton and I. Next Monday's agenda is slam packed. We are not going to have a joint meeting with the county commissioners next Monday. So then we're 3 weeks out. So frankly, my thought is you got a subcommittee. We can start having, those folks can start to have that conversation with the county commissioners rather than waiting 3 weeks to get in front of the council, and then decide from there whether you're going to just put on a regular meeting, whether we're going to take action or whether the county's going to take action. But I would think part of this is utilizing these committees as a way to more efficiently get things done and not necessarily wait, because often, the council cycle puts you off weeks. It rarely ever puts you off, days. It's always 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. So that's waiting to figure out what we're going to do ASAP. And then your rules of procedure every Monday night, you're making amendments to this agenda. I would think we want to get that group together immediately to figure out what the committee wants to recommend to the council as a whole for those changes. So there's a couple things that I would initiate right out of the gate that we get working on and utilize these assets. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes item number 3, unless there was something else on item number 3 before we move on. Councilor Neese.
Just to help us keep track of issues to committees, we have our initiative list. I'm suggesting, should we have a committee list of issues that have been, so that you can continue to report to them as well? I'm just throwing that out, what council members think.
I would think that during the council report section of our business meetings, where that's a part of our agenda, that would be a good time to have an update from those committees at a minimum. But Councilmember Choi?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yeah, just a little bit of a clarification. If members of council have an idea or have a suggestion that a committee should work on, maybe it would be helpful if we had created some kind of Google Doc form where you would lay that on the table, and every council meeting, if there's something, or email it or whatever, if you have some idea of what you think we should be working on, you give us a heads up so we can look at that and see where it's going. I don't think it involves city staff. It would just be for the committee members to figure out, hey, and then have a little discussion about what that might mean and where that would be a priority. So I think we could do a little Google Doc or something like that and be able to inform each other that we have an idea. So.
Okay, ready to move on to public comment on non-agenda items? Okay, so this is your opportunity, if you're with us this evening in person or online, to comment on anything that was not on our agenda this evening. Just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address. Jackie.
Jacqueline Garcia, Dorothy Lane. First, Councilmember Purington, beautiful prayer. Thank you. Hopefully the subcommittees will communicate with the Commissioner's office on thoughts and our complaints. I started coming here 2 months ago now because of a neighbor, but it's come to show and lighten my eyes of where we could improve as a community. Because it's not just about one neighbor. Every area has that one neighbor. And, you know, we put money into rehab, make sure we're trying to get those people off the street. But what about the kids? And I keep saying that because the kids are our future. We're gonna see these kids be adults. And if they continue on their ways, they're gonna be the same as the adults that we're dealing with now. In 2020, youth ages 16 to 17 were 55% of the violent crimes. 1 in 14 violent crimes committed was by a youth. I live in the Heights. There's really nowhere for kids to go after school and hang out. You have the skating rink that's clear across town, maybe. There's nothing for kids to do. We need to think about stuff for kids to do. Indoor, what is it? Like in putt-putt. Miniature golf, thank you. Indoor miniature golf. They could do that all year round. You know, we have tons of bars, we have tons of casinos, but we don't have anything for our kids, our youth. They're our future. If we're not helping them to grow up to be productive members of society, what are we doing? Because it has shown that if the children have a safe place to go and hang out, if they're included in extracurricular activities, it aids in preventing juvenile delinquency by 50%. That's a huge amount. With all the kids doing all this stuff that's bad, that gives them somewhere safe to go, something to do, and it's not far away. You know, I understand money's not there to put something everywhere, but a start somewhere. Because if we don't do something, these kids are going to grow up to be adults. And these adults are going to be the same type of offenders that we have now, but it's going to be doubled. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Just want to start things, Sean Callahan, Dorothy Lane. First, before I get into a lot of things, I want to kind of address this towards Chris. I believe it was September 19th when you went out to the elevator with my wife and all that. I just wanted to shake your hand and thank you for apologizing to her for the mistreatment that happened out there and making things correct, so thank you. Second off, I was going to come up here and, you know, when does a county problem become a city problem and have all these things going. But what Ms. Parrington said with bringing in commissioners and all that, I will save all that for that topic. I think we really need to discuss with them and make this bridge and stop this broken system and all those good things. One thing that I do want to state tonight is I know there's a lot of programs out there to help with AA, drug treatments, programs like that. I called the Rimrock Foundation. There's a lot that goes on with insurance If you don't have insurance, they quoted me upwards of $10,000 to $20,000. That's something that can't be outreached. I know that MRM and a couple other places and facilities that I called would try to take forward people over. But when I have the problem is when taxpayers' dollars are being spent to help out on these programs, but the jailhouse doesn't have any programs in there. And when you don't bridge gaps and you tell an alcoholic, hey, we'll take this meeting off. We'll go to this meeting. They look forward to these meetings. They're helping them out. They're getting them going. When you put these gaps in between them, you're not helping anybody. You're just throwing money right out the window. And so hopefully with these commissioner meetings and these jail talks, we can make better use of taxpayer dollars with doing these programs, but also having these programs involved into the jail systems to carry on and continue to help out, as well as jail expansion, because no matter what, you commit a crime, you should be charged that crime. Yes, there are underlying problems that we need to get to, but I called them today and spoke with a number of people down there at the jail facility. Morale is down. They're volunteer-based. There is Jeremiah from the Rimrock Association, peer support, help. From what they told me, if there's no insurance, no money, there's no help. Volunteers are there, there's no help. We have no help. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? I don't see anyone else in person. Anyone else online? No, we do not. So we'll close the public comment period on non-agenda items. Any council initiatives? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.